Rebecca. Welcome to my channel, A Taste for Life, where I will be exploring all things eating disorder related. Let's get to it. Welcome to The Technical. In this video, I'll be graphically and candidly talking about my story, specifically the gap I had from services between the end of 2016 and beginning of 2018. Trigger warning. The content of this video is highly taboo in the eating disorder community and may be very confronting to those with an active eating disorder, those in recovery, and even to those of the wider audience of loved ones, carers of sufferers, or even just the average person watching. I'll be sparing no details, as vivid as that means I have to get, but incorporating trigger warnings into this clip as it progresses to mark the sections that require higher warning levels. As always, if you feel my appearance or content is triggering at any point, please do click off. Hello, and welcome to today's video, The Technical, Eating Disorder Taboo Talk. Before I get into this video, I just want to give a little bit of an update. So if you're following my social media account at all, you would have noticed that I took a little break because I wasn't feeling too great. And I did mention it wasn't anything eating disorder related, which is great news. Everything in that aspect is going really well, and I'm staying on track, gaining more weight, so everything is good there. But today I did officially test as COVID positive, which I kind of suspected. I had been taking tests every day prior to today, but today is just when it decided to show positive. So I'm in a bit of isolation now, which gives me plenty of time to work on content. My symptoms are still there, but they're a little bit sporadic and spontaneous. So in between symptoms, I'm trying to get a few things done, and hopefully I'll get a few videos out of the way in this time. But I did just want to say, if I am a little bit croaky in this video, that's kind of why. Obviously, one of the things I'm experiencing is with the throat, which is very common with COVID, but it has meant that I have lost my voice and I'm just starting to get it back. So please bear with me, but I will do my best. I also just wanted to take an opportunity to thank everyone so much for their support up to this point. All the lovely messages, just people taking the time to actually view my content, follow my social medias. It really does mean a lot to me that there's even the smallest of followings of this account, so thank you. And it's because of your beautiful words and encouragement that I'm able to make this video today, which I assume will be up for a bit of criticism. It's a bit more of a controversial one, but it's because of your positivity and very welcoming nature that I'm able to feel open enough to make this video. And I do think at the end of the day, it's an extremely important message. So thank you, everyone. Hello, and welcome to The Technical, Eating Disorder Taboo Talk. Before I get into the content of this video, I know you've just listened to my trigger warning. However, I do want to reiterate that this comes with a very high trigger rating. There's a lot that I'm going to be talking about that could be potentially triggering to anyone watching. It's quite confronting material, so if you do feel uncomfortable or you're just not able to process the content, please feel free to click away. Otherwise, enjoy. So today I'm going to be talking about something that I feel is quite prevalent within the eating disorder community, and maybe even a little bit in the wider dieting population. But it's something that is so highly classified. It's something that is not spoken about, and I feel like that there's just a few things that need to be said about this topic. So before I can really get into the point of my video, I have to go back in history a little bit. So if you've watched the last video that I put out, which is video 2 of my eating disorder story, then you'll kind of know I left off
saying that I discharged from the hospital services in 2016 and giving a little spoiler that I didn't re-engage with their services until 2018. So I need to briefly speak about what happened in that middle section there when I was under the care of just my GP but not attending the hospital. So, as mentioned, at the end of 2016, I discharged from hospital services. I was a healthy BMI at the time, and although the hospital recommended continuing care under their supervision, I was able to make my own decision at that point, and my choice was to leave their services and continue care just under my GP. So I got home after that admission knowing that my GP would be my primary carer. I stuck close enough to my meal plan at that time for a little while, but things felt a little bit different. After a while at home, I started to notice a funny feeling after I was eating, and I just wasn't sure what was happening. So following close enough to the meal plan meant that I developed the usual symptoms. I got a bit bloated, I was feeling a bit full, there was the mental anguish that was going on in the background, but I was able to do it until it just became too much and a symptom presented that was very unexpected, and that's what I'll be getting into today. So the strange symptoms I was experiencing was something that I was kind of oblivious about. I knew what was going on, but I couldn't explain it, and things that I tried to research online about it wasn't always very clear. I wasn't sure exactly what was happening. I speculated, but really didn't know. It's not something that I had heard about happening to eating disorder patients, and I wasn't sure what to do with the information. But basically, it wasn't until years later, in 2018, that I was diagnosed with an underlying condition called gastroparesis, which explained a lot of my symptoms. So if I jump to 2018 for a moment, essentially what happened was I was at the hospital relaying these symptoms to the team, and a few tests were done. One in which was a nuclear medicine gastric emptying study, which revealed severe gastroparesis for solids. Now, gastroparesis is something that I personally think would be very prevalent within the eating disorder community. And like I said, I feel like it has a prevalence and a presence even in just the community of those who diet, maybe yo-yo dieting even. And essentially what gastroparesis is, it's the slowing of the digestive system. So the symptoms are on a wide spectrum. It can be something as small as tiredness, all the way up to like indigestion and heartburn. And there are lots of little symptoms in between, which is why I think it goes so unnoticed, because a lot of these symptoms are just everyday common occurrences for different people. However, for me, my symptoms were quite acute and they were very advanced, which meant that they even became life-threatening. So for me, my gastroparesis presented with the symptom of reflux. So as I was continuing to snack and eat meals at home after discharging in 2016, I began to realize that after certain meals or after certain snacks, I was getting reflux. And there was no real pattern to it. It was just random at this point. So I didn't make the connection that it was necessarily anything that was dangerous. I thought it might just be part of the eating disorder, refeeding maybe a little bit. But I decided to ignore it and just go with it and see if it improved as I progressed with my meal plans and keeping up my nutrition. Eventually, however, these bouts of reflux throughout the day that were occurring here and there really did intensify, and it got to a point where I was not able to keep down any of my food. So whatever I was putting in would come straight back up, and I knew that this was something that was scary and that shouldn't be happening. but I was too afraid to tell anyone. I thought if I shared this information with anyone that I would be sent straight back to hospital, and although I really did not enjoy the process of being sick every time that I put something in my mouth, I was just too afraid to end up back in the hospital system when I just finally got a little piece of freedom and was able to return to my job, was engaging with my friends again, and it's just something I didn't want to let go of. So, because I was so afraid that I would be punished or automatically put on the eating disorder ward again if people found out about these symptoms, I kept it to myself. But I needed to create a few new rules around how I could navigate through these without people noticing what was happening. So, for me, my eating disorder was always restrictive. So, that's kind of where I headed with that. I decided that I'd only have something once a day so that I wasn't having to be sick all the time. So generally, whatever I was going to have, I'd have at nighttime after work, and I would have it in the privacy of my own space. I would make sure that I didn't eat in front of people. That way, no one knew what was going on. And this is something that my parents fought me very hard on. Obviously, they didn't know if I was eating or not, and they wanted me to be having the meals with them. But as time progressed forward, they could see that I was still functioning, which meant that I was still having something. So they were happy to live with it as long as I agreed that I would keep seeing my GP, keep tracking my health to make sure I was okay. And they just thought I was having my meals in private. They had no idea about anything else that was going on. And that is obviously because of me. I didn't express what was happening. But either way, I'm very glad I had that space, because I do feel what would have happened if they found out and I ended up back in the hospital so soon with the recurring cycle going on and on again. It just wouldn't have been pretty. And just as a quick side note here, when I say it wouldn't have been pretty, when I discharged from services in 2016, it was mostly because I was in such a dark headspace because of this recurring inpatient cycle. And so breaking that tether to that cycle gave me a sense of freedom and just a little bit of liberation from what felt like such restrictive treatment. And I've said this before, but treatment doesn't always work because there is no cure. So people get better, but the hospital doesn't actually have the answers to how people get better. So the recurring cycle wasn't actually making me any better. It was making me worse, and it was making me regress. So to get a break from that was all I needed and all I wanted at the time. Also, for my parents who were watching me in this endless cycle, they were beginning to see that the hospital really wasn't helping me at all either, and they were starting to notice that it was making things a lot worse. So when I say that they went along with my plan, it was not without a fight, and they didn't want me to be doing it, but the main thing they were concerned about was keeping me safe. So if they could see that I was still okay, and if I followed up with my GP for weekly monitoring, which I did for bloods and blood pressure and the rest of it, then they were happy enough to live with it, knowing that I really did need a break from that system. So basically, I was living with gastroparesis and had no idea because it wasn't diagnosed until 2018. So I just thought there was something wrong with me, but I knew I needed to keep it a secret. And no one really picked up on it because I still had quite a lot of energy. So I've already put a trigger warning before this, but I really do have to stress this is quite triggering stuff, what I'm about to get into. I'm about to just describe what I was having at this time. So when this first began, I was kind of just going along with whatever I would have normally. So let's just say, for example, I'd have a bread roll with whatever. Like, I was just having normal things, I guess. But as my illness further and further progressed, symptoms exacerbated more with solid foods. That's something that I was noticing. And I really did not enjoy the feeling of being sick. As much as it was making me lose weight, which it was, I still didn't like the way it was happening. I didn't like that sensation, but it was just something that I didn't know what was causing it, so I just had to go along with it until there was a safe enough time to tell somebody about it. So I just decided to eliminate all solids, and I would usually have juices and ice cream and things that were very soft and sweet in order to sustain my energy levels. Now, as you can imagine, what I was having at the time really wasn't staying down, so I had to have quite a lot of it. So there'd be nights where I would just have juice upon juice because as soon as I have it, it would come back up. It was very hard to keep myself hydrated, and a lot of the time when there were issues, it would be around my blood pressure just because I was living in basically a constant state of dehydration. But aside from that all, I was able to maintain a level of energy and a level of alertness that meant I could go to work, I could go to social events, I could participate in pool activities. I used to do a lot of like aqua aerobics. And so my life really did progress even though I was living with this secret illness. My life was good for about a year. I had so much fun working my full-time job and balancing that with my newfound freedoms in life. However, when it got to 2018, at the beginning of the year, the gastroparesis really got worse and worse to a stage where it was making me feel sick even just to have the drinks. So I was eliminating more and more, and that really caught up with my body. And as I'm going to talk about in my eating disorder video 3, it landed me in very hot water and back in the hospital system once again. So now that you kind of have all the gory details, I kind of want to circle back to the point of this video. And there are a few things that I really want to make note of. The first thing, which I've kind of already talked about, is that this is something that is not discussed in the eating disorder world. I was in and out of hospital so much prior to my discharge in 2016, and not once was there mention of these kinds of symptoms. And I can sort of understand why. It's a little bit triggering to think about this as a potential outcome from your eating disorder, but I think some education and awareness is really needed around it because the slowing of the digestive system is something that is going to happen to every eating disorder patient. And I think it's just the severity that kind of distinguishes if they're told about it or not. So my gastroparesis advanced to a stage where it was so prevalent, they really needed to diagnose it for what it was. But I think a lot of underlying issues for eating disorder patients are caused by this illness, and it's just kind of swept under the rug for fear of it triggering something in them. And I get it, but there's no excuse for hiding information and just facts about what's happening to your body. So the second thing I want to mention about this gastroparesis is the lack of knowledge around it from eating disorder professionals. And look, I can understand why it may not be as prevalent to the severity that I had it. So maybe it's just a bit of lack of education around that. But the amount of different conflicting advice I was given is extraordinary. You know, one doctor insisted that I just swallow it back. Every time it comes up, swallow it back. And that was kind of the hospital motto pretty much the entire time I was there was, it's happening, you've just got to swallow it back and retrain your body that it shouldn't be doing it, which didn't really work, by the way, but that was the advice. Another doctor from the same team, I guess, told me that I needed to let it come back up, but just keep replenishing, which is kind of what landed me in hospital in the first place. Like, I'd have my drink, it'd come back up, I'd try to have another drink, it'd come back up. But basically that was her advice. I don't know if she maybe thought I was exaggerating how much it was happening, but when it's happening all the time, it's pretty much impossible unless I just blank out my entire day to devote it to drinking and letting it come back up. There's really not much I could do, I guess. But there were just so many ideas floating around as to how to effectively treatment that it just made me wonder if they really had a good grasp on what exactly it was and how to exactly treat it. So kind of off the branch of the way I received treatment, the team decided, or one of the consultants along my journey decided to enroll me or direct me to enroll into a course surrounding gastroparesis. So there was this one particular website that went through the stages of how to get through gastroparesis, and there wasn't really a cure, but there are things that can make it more manageable. So I enrolled in this course and I started working through it. And one of the things that I found was that the meal plans they were prescribing in this course were particularly slow, particularly low in solids, low in fats. There's just a whole bunch of things that contribute to gastroparesis, nutritionally wise, that needs to be taken into account, which is what I'm following today in my recovery, but it's not really something that the hospital could accommodate. So the hospital guided me to this program specific for gastroparesis patients. All the while, I'm still having admissions to the hospital and they're doing the exact counteractive thing to what is prescribed in this course. And I tried to explain that to them, but there was nothing they could do. They only have the resources that are available to them. So it ended up being that from the admissions that I had after my first admission in 2018, I would get onto the ward and my meal plan would consist of only Ensure drinks, which is a nutritionally fortified energy drink. I would not have any solids. I would not have anything else because liquid was all that I could really tolerate, and even that I wasn't particularly good at tolerating all the time. But that's the only way that I could survive on the eating disorder ward because of the lack of accommodation they could put around my symptoms. Now, this is something I have to take a lot of accountability for because it was my choice not to tell anyone what was happening. But I just want to point out that an underlying issue here is that the hospital experience for me became so traumatic and so horrific in my mind that when these symptoms presented, I was too scared to share it with anyone because I thought it would land me back in hospital. Now, hospital is meant to be a safe haven for those who think they are ill or need help, and for me, it was something that I was running afraid from. So I just want to reiterate that maybe this continual cycle of admissions that are ineffective isn't the best way to go because it really deflects and defers people from seeking the help they need when they really need it out of fear that they'll be trapped in this perpetual cycle of ineffectiveness. And one of the final points that I want to make about gastroparesis is, again, just to express how prevalent I think it is in the eating disorder community. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, there is such a wide spectrum of where you could sit with gastroparesis because it's such a broad definition, like slowing of digestion could apply to anyone really. So you have to try and be a little bit conscious about where you're sitting. But I only want people to keep this in the back of their mind when they're starting recovery, just because of a particular trend that's out there, which is the all-in approach, which I think has its own merits. I've seen it work for a lot of people. I mean, not personally, but through YouTube and things like that. So I can tell it is effective for some people. But when you have gastroparesis, you need to almost consider it like another layer of refeeding syndrome. So as an eating disorder patient, we all hear about refeeding syndrome, which is the potential for increasing intake to kind of whack out and unbalance our electrolytes and things that are functioning in our body, which can make us sick. It's the same with gastroparesis. If you've got a really, really slowed down digestion and you start to feed yourself really quickly and in quite great quantities, there is a very big danger in that, and you could be doing more damage than you realize. So if you think you may have gastroparesis and you're trying to do recovery on your own, I really urge you to do the research. Try and figure out on which end of the spectrum you are and just take it very carefully. If you can do it under the direction of a dietitian, I would also recommend that. For me, it wasn't exactly possible, but I managed because of such the large experience I've had in the hospital with dietitians working with me and with my own research. So that's kind of what I would suggest. Maybe the all-in approach may not be good for you if you do have severe enough gastroparesis. And the last thing I want to touch on is really just giving people a message of hope. I feel like I developed a very, very severe type of gastroparesis, but it doesn't mean that you can't get better. Gastroparesis is not curable, but I do take a medication that helps with the nausea, which a GP can prescribe, and also following certain types of rules around what I'm having, my intake-wise. I know it seems counteractive when you're in recovery, but it's actually a really important part of the journey for people like me. So all that kind of information is available online, and you can sort of figure out what is applicable to you once you identify where you are on that spectrum. For me, I took it very, very slow, but as I've disclosed, I'm still gaining weight from my meal plan. It's still working for me. So even though it's not the usual quantities and timings and things of that nature that a recovered person would be engaging in, it's my own version of it, and it's what's working for me and my body, and I have to be mindful of gastroparesis all the time, and I just need to make sure that I'm doing what is good for my recovery and my digestive system. So it's a bit of a balancing act at the moment, but I'm steadily increasing in weight, and it's a really positive sign that I'm doing something right. I'm able to keep the meals I'm having down, which admittedly at the moment is mostly liquids and purees, but eventually I'll be integrating some softer solids into it as well. And look, I may never be able to process really dense solids or really high fat foods again without having some kind of symptom, but it doesn't mean that I won't learn to be able to have it on occasion, even if it's not necessarily the best thing. You hear about the lactose-free person who just feels like cheese one day and knows they'll suffer later, but just indulges in a little bit of it here and there. And that's kind of where I feel like I want to get with my gastroparesis. Really dense solids probably won't be a big part of my meal plan going ahead, but if I can just get the ability to enjoy it here and there, that's kind of would be good enough for me, I guess. So I hope I've been able to raise a little bit of awareness here and just give a little bit of information to people about what things people may experience during an eating disorder, or like I said, even just dieting. Again, I feel like if you're dieting, it might be on the lower spectrum, but it's definitely something to be aware of. I think everyone deserves to know what's happening with their body, and the slowing of the digestive system is definitely a severe enough thing to keep in mind for your overall picture of health. As just a final piece of advice for people who suspect that someone they know with an eating disorder may have gastroparesis, it may be severe, it may not, letting that person know can be a very confronting experience. I would say please don't approach them in anger and accusation and just be like, I think this is happening to you. If you're going to raise it with them, do it in a really nurturing and in a really respective way. Try to make them feel comfortable. It is something that does feel embarrassing, and I remember when I was telling the team for the first time, particularly not knowing what it was, I felt really vulnerable and quite scared and a little bit, humiliated about it. Like, it's not something that's pleasant. I didn't like it, but getting the awareness out there, I hope, is going to help people open up a bit more about it. So if you can, just come from a compassionate place. If you're going to raise it, I think you'll get a better response from the person. That's it for this video. However, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. I'm pretty open about this stuff, as long as it doesn't get into too triggering of a territory. But I will stay in touch with my next video updates on my socials, and I will see you later. Bye!